Bill Belichick taking Zac Taylor's job has become a popular idea amongst Bengals fans, but the latest reports about Belichick returning to coaching very much complicates that dream for Cincinnati. And in this video, I'll explain why the Bengals would be their own worst enemy in chasing it. What's up, Bengals fans? John Sheeran of A to Z Sports Cincinnati here, and I know the Bengals are just coming off of a win. They're still technically in the playoff race as of now, but there's still going to be a conversation about the future of this coaching staff and whether or not there should be an entirely new coaching staff at all. And in that conversation, Bill Belichick has obviously been brought up a ton by Bengals fans. Like, the connections here are pretty easy to make. A lot of people compare Joe Burrow to Tom Brady. Bill Belichick is the most known commodity a head coach could possibly be. He's arguably the greatest head coach of all time. I don't really think that argument has a lot of flaws in it. And when you're dealing with a franchise that, let's just say, runs things differently, you would want the most ironclad candidate possible to run your football operations. I totally understand why Belichick is in this conversation. What also needs to be understood is that this is Bill Belichick we're talking about, and he's not going to take any job in which he doesn't have all the control that he could possibly want. In case you haven't been following the news with Belichick, he is reportedly in talks with potentially becoming the next head coach at the University of North Carolina, according to Ollie Connolly, who's been ahead of all of this reporting. And according to Connolly, he presented the program with a 400-page organizational Bible detailing all the structural changes that the program would need to make in order for him to fit in that environment. And this isn't just for North Carolina. This is for other colleges and other NFL teams. And my God, man, I can only imagine how a meeting would go between Belichick and the Bengals, where Belichick presents the Bengals 400 pages of details describing how what they do is wrong and why he's here to change it. I can only imagine how hysterical that meeting would go. Like, this is the Bengals that we're talking about here. They have changed, but evolution in nature happens quicker than change within that organization. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention that both Marvin Lewis and Zac Taylor instituted change within the organization right after they were hired, right? Marvin Lewis gets credited for bringing the Bengals into the 21st century, most notably no longer having to buy Gatorade in your own locker room. Zac Taylor expanded the coaching staff. He added new offices. I think his arrival kind of sparked their interest in free agency. Like, the head coach is still the head of football operations, and what they say goes, and I do feel like the Bengals have allowed their past two head coaches to kind of do what they want. But this is Belichick we're talking about. This is the guy who last coached for the New England Patriots, the Patriot way. And I just have a hard time believing that Belichick and the Browns and Blackburns are going to see eye to eye as to how to recreate that in Cincinnati. Because when the Patriots were able to sustain a 2-decade-long dynasty, it was more than just having a pairing between the best head coach and quarterback in the world together. The entire organization had a win-at-all-cost mentality. They didn't let things like guaranteed money get in the way of sustaining success year in and year out. And even in those examples where the Patriots did allow their players to leave in free agency or even trade players away for draft capital, it was almost always the right decision. And yes, it was Belichick who was acting as GM for the majority of his time in New England, but it was also a completely different scouting department, a completely different player personnel department, and a completely different front office. Who knows if he would have the same effectiveness in Cincinnati, and who knows if he would even have the same amount of power, or if the Bengals would even let him have the same amount of power here. But of course, all of this is moot, right? If Belichick does somehow, some way end up in Cincinnati, he's going to have all of those assurances before he signs on the dotted line. I just think it's highly doubtful that it's ever going to get to that point, because if the Bengals do fire Zac Taylor, it's going to be really, really hard for them to attract anyone with an ounce of leverage. They're really only going to be able to attract candidates that were a lot like Zac Taylor, that had a lot to prove, knowing that they wouldn't be able to institute wholesale changes to the organization when hired. Obviously, the Bengals would benefit from hiring a head coach who's already had success at the NFL level, but until they change for themselves first, they're not going to change for someone else.